Chapter 181, A Fight to the Death and Rainbow Moth's Humph. In your dreams. You aren't using your brain to think about it. Us two Marshall brothers were lucky enough to be transported together. We are already really lucky. At the very least, our chances of survival are much greater. Being able to get rid of this man was just luck. Do you believe I am patient enough to play the game of idly waiting for prey? Don't be scared of meeting ferocious men and have our teeth throb. Are we not already playing with our lives by entering this place? Besides, how could there be anyone in this damnable place? We should go to the center area as soon as possible and take advantage of the danger. This is the best plan. The older Spirit Mountain disciple was clearly the stronger of the two. He was also much more clever. While he was lecturing him, he was also vigilantly sweeping his eyes over the deep forest in every direction. Having seen this, Han Li grew even more careful and used his chi restraining technique to its utmost. He also held his breath, not daring to expose himself in the slightest. As for the stupid thought of taking them on by himself, Han Li didn't even think of it. There was no way he would do something so dumb. One of the two had magic power at the beginning of the 12th layer. The other was at the highest step of the 12th layer. If they were to join hands, he wouldn't just have little chance of success, he simply wouldn't be able to resist their great strength. Thus, Han Li could only stare blankly as the two gathered the very last of the cold smoke grass and set fire to the corpse of the Heavenly Imperial Fortress disciple. Lastly, the two men stored the cold ice toads into a red-colored storage bag and then disappeared to the other side of the dense forest. Just after the two departed, Han Li did not immediately walk out. Only after he waited for a moment did he reveal himself from the foliage. After he stood, he looked thoughtfully in the direction of the two people. It seemed it was more or less like he had thought. There were many like-minded people here. It was no wonder, since these were people who took the risk to participate in the trial by blood and fire. How many of them wouldn't think to go the center for those spiritual items of heaven and earth? It would be difficult to avoid battle. After all, spiritual items that reached maturity were truly limited. There were fundamentally not enough for each sect. Han Li's face darkened. He bitterly thought this while standing in place for a while. He had witnessed with his own eyes as the blue-clothed person, who was just as careful as himself, silently disappeared from this world. It was unknown how many similar events occurred throughout the forbidden area. This caused Han Li's confidence in fulfilling his objective to sway by no small amount. He truly did not know whether or not it was a good idea to go on this trip to the forbidden area. Perhaps if he had taken those 2 Foundation Establishment pills, he might have been able to reach Foundation Establishment and fundamentally not need brave this strange danger. Han Li felt discouraged and had a faint notion of retreating. After all, while continuing was easy to say, one's thoughts would be in turmoil with the shadow of death looming in their mind. After several hours, Han Li left the vicinity and advanced toward the center of the forbidden area. After a moment of contemplation, Han Li's reason won over. He knew that those recent thoughts of carefulness were only his own weakness looking for an excuse. Thus, he strengthened his mind and resumed walking on the path. Han Li did not follow behind the two and instead took a detour, indirectly advancing even though the two from Spirit Beast Mountain took the closest and fastest route. Han Li wasn't being paranoid. With his abilities, the opponents would be able to find him. In addition, he was also fearful of Spirit Beast Mountain's exceptional beast controlling method. He did not know whether the opponent had any unusual methods of discovering a pursuer, but it would be best to maintain his distance. It should be known that he originally used the small cloudwing bird, which had minor human intelligence, to track and monitor specific individuals from a long distance. It could be assumed that Spirit Beast Mountain also had a similar controlling method. Their methods were certain to be even more crafty and covert. After all, they were cultivators. How could the methods of Jiang possibly compare? With regards to the cloudwing bird, Han Li felt a bit of regret. When he entered Yellow Maple Valley, in order to prevent arousing attention, he released the bird into the Taiyu mountain range, allowing it to freely move about. As a result, the bird frequently returned to look for its master, Han Li, for its favorite food, the yellow chestnut pill. However, after a long period of time, it gradually returned fewer and fewer times. By the time Han Li realized his mistake, The bird had already become wild and had actually flown to some faraway land, never to be seen again. This caused Han Li much heartache, as it would have been of much use on this journey within the forbidden area. What Han Li did not know was that his decision to take a roundabout route truly allowed him to escape calamity. After the two disciples from Spirit Beast Mountain left the Black Dragon Pond, each of them released rainbow moths over a large area. These beautiful flying insects immediately scattered in every direction, densely spreading over an area of about 300 meters. The color of their bodies then gradually changed, slowly matching with its surroundings. The colors of their body blended in so well that they could not be easily seen without a careful examination. Furthermore, even if a few careful people discovered these moths, they would most likely believe them to be native to the forbidden area and not suspect them. Thus, these colorful moths became natural sentries for the two. So long as someone entered their range of awareness, they would immediately alert the two and allow them to plan a response in advance. These numerous insects formed a living alarm network. As alarms, they could be said to be flawless, an expert trick known to Spirit Beast Mountain disciples. Although disciples of their own sect would know of this beforehand, they would have no method of passing through the moths and mounting a sneak attack against the two. Actually, with regards to Han Li's decision at Black Dragon Pond, it could be considered a great fortune. Those two from Spirit Beast Mountain did not yet release the rainbow moths at the pond and only released them after leaving. Otherwise, Han Li would not have escaped their notice. This wasn't a matter of negligence or forgetfulness. The moths were naturally fearful of the cold. If the temperature was a bit too low, they would freeze and die one by one. It would be truly regretful for the two. This Black Dragon Pond's water was of a strange nature and possessed an incomparable coldness. All the land nearby the pool transformed into a winter-like terrain. Under these circumstances, how could they dare to release their rainbow moths, only to see them die? Han Li wasn't aware in the least that his actions had prevented calamity. He was currently standing below a strange cliff, speechlessly looking at two wretched corpses by his feet. One of the corpses wore black skin-tight clothes and had a tall and bulky stature with large palms. There was a thin dark red line of blood across his neck. The eyes were still open with an expression of unwillingness. It seemed he died discontentedly. The body appeared to be that of a giant sword sect disciple. As for the other body, it was of medium stature and was badly mutilated. What was most significant was its face was not intact. There was a huge sword that was thrusted all the way through his head. He had been impaled to the floor with it while he was still alive, causing bits of brain and blood to flow on the ground. However, a strange transparent thread was coiled around the ring finger of his right hand. Underneath the sunlight, he saw a faint flicker. Han Li carefully studied the corpse of the giant sword sect disciple for a very long time. Then he suddenly lifted the corpse by the tip of its feet and looked toward the red line at the neck, giving the head a light kick. As a result, the large head immediately rolled to the side. He did not need to use much strength. This person had long been split in two. Han Li sighed and looked toward the other corpse. Although he didn't have a face, Han Li already knew his identity since the corpse wore yellow robes similar to his own. There couldn't be stronger proof. However, he did not know which of his Yellow Maple Valley martial brothers the corpse belonged to. He clearly understood that these two died killing each other. Han Li lifted his head and looked toward the cliff peak without moving. He had already reached a final conclusion. In his mind, he imagined most of what took place between the two. From all the marks, the giant sword sect disciple should have exceeded the power of Han Li's senior martial brother by an entire layer. The corpse of the yellow-clothed disciple was badly mutilated and was riddled with injuries. The unreconciled expression on the black-clothed person's head clearly explained this matter. Although the senior martial brother from his sect was in a disadvantageous position, it was clear this person loved scheming. The only magic tool he used was actually that transparent thread. He definitely made use of his enemy's careless attitude as he was about to win. At the very last moment, he used this item to launch a sneak attack, severing his opponent's head and killing the giant sword sect disciple. However, he clearly didn't expect that the black-clothed man had enough strength left to launch his sword before he died. It was unknown whether the Yellow Maple Valley disciple was either too wounded to avoid the strike or if he had made a mistake on the verge of victory. But in the end he was impaled, resulting in a battle without a victor. Chapter 182. A young woman and thread. Since it was clear how these two had died, Han Li could only pray that his senior martial brother had a pleasant journey to the Yellow Springs and would reincarnate soon. Then, with no trace of politeness, he plundered their bodies. In any case, these people were already dead. Han Li would naturally kindly accepted their storage pouches. After a search once through, he couldn't find them. His expression became grave as he carefully searched through them once more, but he still could not find them. Han Li felt the hair on his body grow cold and stiff. His heartbeat started to accelerate. There was actually a fourth person here. It was this person who took away their storage pouches. Although this person had most likely long departed from this place, he could not guarantee that this person was not observing nearby, using these two corpses as bait and waiting for him to make a mistake. Facing away from the cliff, there was a large area of grass, tall enough to hide a man. Han Li was currently half-squatting near the corpses with his back facing the grass. This caused him to be greatly worried. There might be someone hiding behind him. Han Li didn't move and remained in a squatting position. From behind, it would appear he was still focused on the corpses. However, he had already quietly taken out magic tools and talismans and used the entirety of his consciousness to silently release his spiritual sense, attempting to find the person who might be hiding there. The outcome of his spiritual sense search did not surprise Han Li. Everything nearby was normal, and there were no unusual fluctuations of spiritual qi. With nothing being out of the ordinary, there must definitely be someone nearby. This person must be using the restraining breath technique to hide their body's magic power, making Han Li naturally unable to find them. The reason why Han Li searched with his spiritual sense was to beat the grass and scare the snake. TL. Beating the grass to scare the snake, alerting the enemy as to intimidate or scare them. At the very least, the opponent who existed in his thoughts wouldn't dare to act blindly. The outcomes he truly expected was either that he had scared himself with groundless fears and there was nobody here, or the person who had restrained their breath this entire time and was spying on him would see no opportunity to take advantage of him and therefore would not plan to act. After a moment, Han Li stood and turned around to the large area of tall grass. After he sized up the area several times with a cold glance, he suddenly leapt away without saying a word, transforming into a black as he gradually grew farther away. When Han Li's figure had completely disappeared without a trace, rustling suddenly came from within the originally peaceful tall grass. A slim figure walked out. It was actually a young girl with fluttering white clothes. This girl appeared young, only about 15 to 16 years old. However, her appearance was pure, and her face appeared innocent and adorable. In this place of life and death, such a fairy-like charmer had appeared. It was truly hard to believe. From the look of her clothes, she should be affiliated with the Masked Moon sect. The young woman looked the direction Han Li disappeared and smiled with pursed lips. With a voice overflowing with age, she said to herself, "Your bravery and wisdom isn't bad. It's your magic power that's a bit lacking. It seems there is also a large problem with your aptitude. There isn't much potential that can be drawn out. If not for that, you would have surely been one of those who would make it out alive." Regardless, the technique he used to run away seemed to be Qigong from the mortal world. Furthermore, it wasn't weak, and was actually truly interesting. The young woman lightly raised her sharp chin with opened eyes, showing an expression of considerable interest. If Han Li had heard those words, he would only be stunned with fear. Her words were far too accurate. With just a few words, she was able to sinisterly point out his strengths and weaknesses as if she understood him more than himself. "I'll let you go for now. I am still preoccupied with other business. However, the next time I see you, young fellow, I won't let you off so easily," the young woman said with a bit of unwillingness as she wrinkled her nose, creating a mischievous crease. It was as if Han Li had become her newly acquired toy. She was greatly interested in him, causing her to regret having to leave. In the end, the young woman pouted with her small mouth and took out a talisman. With a wave of her hand, she was enveloped in dazzling green light and disappeared. If there was someone present who had saw that scene, they would perhaps immediately feel heartache and loudly curse this woman's clan, hoping it would wither. She actually squandered a talisman that was rarely seen in the cultivation world, a wood evasion technique talisman, as she pleased. That was an elementary mid-grade talisman. It should be known that if an average person had this wood evasion talisman, although it wasn't enough to be a family heirloom, it was something that could only be used in a matter of life or death, since its most optimal use was to escape death. Han Li did not know any of this, so he naturally felt no heartache. Even more so, he couldn't have known that there was a woman who was greatly interested in him and thought about him often. He still believed that he had lightly escaped from a predicament and was currently rejoicing. Regardless of whether or not there was truly someone there, Han Li did not intend to look into it further. After all, the closer he approached the central area, the more common enemies would become. They would set up similar ambushes, and attacking others would gradually become a common occurrence. To preserve his own life, he must spare no effort to avoid all sorts of unnecessary conflict. That was Han Li's current plan of operation. Besides, it wasn't as if Han Li gained nothing from those two corpses. With this thought, Han Li held out his hand. There was a ball of transparent thread in his palm. As he departed, he picked up that item in passing. It was the thread-like magic tool that had been used to kill the giant sword sect disciple. Han Li poured a bit of magic power into the magic tool, which gradually became taut and straight. In the end, it unexpectedly became a perfectly straight thread over 30 meters long. Han Li controlled and waved the thread as he wished for a moment, and he immediately felt that this item had clever uses. After he was finished, he truly thought this was the perfect weapon for an ambush. Because of its near-invisible properties and its incomparably sharp and completely flexible cuts, Han Li could confidently behead his opponents without them even knowing. He truly did not know what material was used to refine this thread. If it was able to become even longer, then there would be countless clever uses. Han Li's mood grew as he willed the thread through more than 10 large nearby trees. All of them were cut in two without the slightest resistance. This caused Han Li to be greatly happy as even more uses began to grow in his mind. Han Li did not know that at this time, near the center of the forbidden area, the disciples of Saber Transformation Doc and the Clear Void sect were engaged face to face in close combat. Because each party had 5 to 6 people, their strength was about the same, making them evenly matched. This was the first large-scale deathmatch in the current trial by blood and fire. The reason was so that they would be the first to enter the central area and pick the spiritual medicines. If they were able to extinguish their opponents here, then naturally they would take advantage of their good fortune. The final outcome was that the skills employed by the Daoist priests from the Clear Void sect were a notch higher. After they killed the majority of their opponents, the remaining 2 from the Saber Transformation Doc fled with injuries. The Clear Void sect disciples then took the initiative to enter the central area. Within the central area, not only would there be many wondrous flowers, bizarre fruits, and other spiritual items of heaven and earth, there would also be strong grade 1 demonic beasts guarding those items, powerful enough to go head-to-head against Peak Foundation establishment disciples. Every time a demonic beast was killed and the medicine was collected, so long as more spiritual medicines grew, demonic beasts would also indescribably appear, although it wouldn't necessarily be the same kind of demonic beast. This already puzzled the sect's many experts to no end. Could it be the demonic beasts were also born spontaneously from the spiritual chi of heaven and earth? This vastly differed from their previous understanding. According to their knowledge, demonic beasts should be formed from living wild animals. Only after subconsciously absorbing the essence of the sun and moon for many years would they be able to occasionally evolve into a demonic beast. The probability of animals evolving was not at all like that of developing cultivators among humans. The animals' odds were far greater. Furthermore, over the years, each of the sect's disciples were only able to gather spiritual medicines on the outskirts of the central area. If they were to approach closer to the center, they would encounter a few restriction spell and traps, becoming trapped or erased. In addition, the further they entered, the more formidable the demonic beasts became. Since the disciples were minor figures with no method to resist, they could only obediently pace back and forth at the outskirts of the central area. Regardless if it were Clear Void sect disciples, not even those who made the first move would be able to take advantage and take the medicines there. At this moment, Han Li had come across the greatest crisis on his trip within the forbidden area. At some narrow road, there was a spirit beast mountain and a heavenly imperial fortress disciple blocking both sides of the road. Han Li actually recognized the large man from Spirit Beast Mountain. He was that fully bearded man who had been staring at him earlier. Currently, he was looking at Han Li with an evil smile, exposing a "you're already dead" expression. Chapter 183 Harmonic Spiritual Talisman. Chapter 183 Harmonic Spiritual Talisman. Han Li tasted some bitterness from his mouth. He did not think that as greatly careful and tremendously cautious as he was, he would still be ambushed. Furthermore, it was one of the worst possible circumstances, between two people. Currently, he was in a zone called the Skyline. Its environment was extremely dangerous. If one did not use flying magic tools, the entire region only had a narrow small path that led to the central area. Lining the two sides of the small path were incomparably steep cliffs. Although Han Li was not weak in the light body martial arts of the mortal world, he would not dare to rashly climb them. As for flying directly over with flying magic tools, the idea was even more absurd. It would be a suicidal action, openly allowing others to launch an attack. Why even think of it? None of the sect's disciples would ever perform such folly. Furthermore, the bitter experiences of his predecessors taught him that flying was an absolutely prohibited action in the forbidden area, else one would leave a corpse. When Han Li entered the vicinity, he hesitated for quite a while. However, he ultimately didn't dare to take the shortcut by flying over the mountain peak. As a result, he was forced to openly follow the small road on foot. Naturally, Han Li was completely wary of the dangers in this area. On the entire way, his nerves were tightly strung. But even so, just when he had walked through the path opening, his path was blocked from the front and back by two people without even the slightest warning. When Han Li saw the bearded man's fierce expression, he knew that to talk arrogantly at this moment was of no use at all. First he slapped the defensive water barrier talisman on his body, and then he brought out the flying dark iron shield. Additionally, he took out the magic tool gold beetle swarm blades, and his few elementary high-grade earth prison technique talismans. The fully bearded man and the person behind him looked at Han Li's actions with cold eyes without the slightest intention of stopping or attacking him. It seemed the two were completely confident. They felt entirely certain that they could handle Han Li and appeared calm. This was no surprise. The person behind him was already at the peak of the 12th layer. Not to mention the fully bearded man had already cultivated to the 13th layer. Facing an 11th layer fledgling such as Han Li, they naturally felt that it would be a trivial matter. When Han Li saw this, he licked his dry lips and inwardly sneered to himself. Since his opponents were so negligent, he would naturally exploit this opportunity. Thus, remaining completely calm, Han Li faced his body to the side so that his enemies were to his right and left, as if they were horns, to avoid being attacked in the back. As expected, these two did not take the opportunity to attack jointly. These were the strongest enemies he had ever faced since he entered the world of cultivation. Even so, Han Li wasn't fearful of them in the least. Although he did his utmost to avoid fighting with others, it wasn't because he had no confidence in himself. Even though Han Li's magic power was greatly lacking and would be a disadvantage in a battle of attrition, the top-quality magic tools and the treasure talisman he possessed were enough to make up for this deficiency. Furthermore, if it truly did not work out, he could take out the Heaven's Lightning Child and eliminate a person. Was that not an easy matter? But whether or not he was willing to use it was an entirely different matter. However, Han Li had a bit of doubt. Why would the fully bearded man and the Heavenly Imperial Fortress disciple not fight one another and instead team up? If they were disciples from the same sect, it would be an ordinary matter. However, these two were obviously not from the same sect. Boy, your courage isn't small. Outside the forbidden area, you actually dared to mock me and exchange flirting glances with that SL*T. Now I will take your life as an apology. The fully bearded man said fiendishly. Then he turned to the Heavenly Imperial Fortress disciple and said, "Brother Yang, I have a grudge against this fellow. Hand this person over to me. I want to treat him properly and let him know that you can't be so reckless in the cultivation world. Before you offend someone in your next life, first remember this before you speak." When the Heavenly Imperial Fortress disciple heard this, he shrugged his shoulders without care and said, "Do as you like. I'll just stand to the side. However, don't be like last time and throw him off the edge. Otherwise, you'll owe me a life-saving favor." Ha ha, that time was a complete accident. This time I'm handling a fledgling. If I use half my strength, I'll have enough to spare. The fully bearded man's face was red, but soon after he slanted his mouth and said this with disdain. "Ku, you should do your best. I truly don't wish for there to be a day I hear of your death. After all, we've been good friends for many years. To find a person of agreeable temperament is truly difficult." The heavenly imperial fortress disciple shook his head. It seemed the fully bearded man's arrogance gave him great headaches, but he did not believe that the opponent before him posed any threat to his old friend. Besides, he was attentively watching from the side. At the side, Han Li did not shut out the two's dialogue and heard it clearly. From the words he heard, the doubts in his heart were cleared. Unexpectedly, these two were originally friends. Furthermore, their relationship was rather good. This was rather troublesome. These two were certain to coordinate together against enemies far better than common temporary alliances. Hearing their words, it seemed they had cooperated on more than one occasion. Han Li couldn't help but feel greatly depressed. It seems I can only use the lightning child. But first, it's important that I dispose of one of them. Then I will be able to handle the remaining one much more easily. However, this is too strange. Originally, each sect's disciples were randomly transported. How could they be transported to the same area and happen to meet? This is truly incredible. Han Li hatefully thought. He felt greatly indignant toward their luck. Han Li did not know that the heavenly imperial fortress disciple had also joyfully thought this in his heart. When this person saw the fully bearded man walk toward Han Li, his mind couldn't help but think that he was able to meet his good friend due to the great work of the harmonic spiritual talisman. High-grade harmonic spiritual talisman. This item is truly useful. So long as we enter the forbidden area during the same moment and use the talisman at the same time, our spiritual chi will temporarily bind together, and the restriction formation will transport us to the same area. Although I heard the odds of success is 50%, the price of the talisman was exceptionally more expensive than ordinary elementary high-grade talismans. But in the end, we were able to wait in that location and successfully ambush several disciples who passed through. It was a great harvest. Besides, I, Yang, am not foolish. Spending such a large price to brave the strange dangers of the forbidden area, was it not in order to openly kill and plunder the many individuals who were covetously gazing at those spiritual medicines? There will be great harvests without any repercussions. This one is convinced that so long as us two join hands and don't come across those fierce experts, our objective will be easily and effortlessly accomplished. Then, when it is near the end, we will pull back and find a place to hide. We'll stay there until it's time and safely leave. This is truly a flawless plan. Only I could have thought of it. The heavenly imperial fortress disciple thought of his future prospects after he left and could not help but think beautiful narcissistic thoughts. His mind naturally did not think of the great battle that was about to occur. At this moment the fully bearded man took out a green leather pouch and sent Han Li an evil grin as he approached. It seemed he wanted to dispose of him. However, it was unknown if it was because of his good friend's warning, but he used a talisman halfway. He became covered in a green-colored light barrier that increased his defense. Seeing these circumstances, Han Li wrinkled his brow. He had a bit of a headache. He was originally going to act fearful of the Spirit Beast Mountain disciple's actions and prepare to make use of this person's negligence, getting rid of this person first. But now that his opponent released a defensive magic technique, this was no longer something he could do in a short amount of time. Naturally, if he used Heaven's Lightning Child, this person wouldn't be able to do anything even if he had other methods. However, this was a one-time use consumable. If it wasn't a crucial moment of life or death, Han Li would not use it. Since using it was out of the question, Han Li naturally planned to attack the heavenly imperial fortress disciple instead. He saw that the person had both hands behind his back with his head raised to the sky. He was currently pondering about something, not taking note of anything happening at all. Han Li was exalted. He knew there was an opportunity to exploit. Without taking the time to think, he used the Earth Prison Technique talisman in his hand, throwing it toward the fully bearded man. As a result, the talisman turned into a stream of yellow light in midair, fiercely shooting toward his opponent. It actually covered the barrier of the fully bearded man's defensive magic technique. It took the shape of a larger yellow barrier and firmly trapped him within, not allowing him to move an inch forward. Chapter 184. Might of the Golden Light Brick. When the fully bearded man saw Han Li with his hand still on the talisman, he was not worried. The wood attribute defensive barrier he wore had frightening defensive power that could fundamentally ignore common attacks. Furthermore, on the basis that his opponent was a novice who cultivated to the 11th layer, he didn't believe that he could possess a talisman of great strength. At most, it would be an elementary mid-grade talisman. Because of this, he continued to walk forward without taking notice, opening his pouch as if he were about to bring something out. But when he was suddenly rooted in place by the yellow light barrier which he recognized as the earth prison technique, the fully bearded man's expression finally changed, realizing that things had taken a turn for the worse. At this time, a strange dark green snake with a pair of purple wings leapt out from his pouch. As soon as it appeared, the snake immediately made a few odd gwa-gwa cries and began to viciously attack the yellow barrier, causing the barrier to tremble continuously. Its strength was not small. When the fully bearded man saw this, his spirits were slightly lifted. He took out another pouch to release another spirit beast, hoping to combine their efforts to break through the earth prison. He was confident that he would be able to escape in a short period of time. When he escaped, he would definitely pull out his opponent's ribs one by one to quench the hatred in his heart. Han Li didn't even pay attention to his surrounding enemies. In a swift movement, he rushed towards the man from the heavenly imperial fortress. His movements were quick, and throughout the whole way he seemed to be darting in and out of view, even leaving behind a series of afterimages, making him seem almost phantom-like. At the same time, Han Li gently patted the storage pouch near his waist. The original gold beetle swarm blades suddenly switched with another similarly small magic tool that he clutched tightly in his hand. At this time, the man from the heavenly imperial fortress finally awoke from his beautiful dream, instantly seeing the strange scene unfolding in front of him. His expression changed dramatically. He hurriedly backed up and flipped his palm, causing a talisman to appear. Meanwhile, Han Li was still at least 30 meters away from him. The man relaxed, thinking that there was more than enough time to cast the talisman. However, before he was able to use his spiritual power to activate the talisman, he was stunned to see that the charging Han Li suddenly smiled mysteriously at him. In turn, one of Han Li's hands gently waved at him, a movement similar to a greeting between two familiar friends. At the same time, he also felt a slight itch on his neck, as if he had been bitten by a mosquito. The man from the heavenly imperial fortress stared blankly, yet to realize the other side's intention. In a moment of turmoil, his eyes dimmed as he lost consciousness. Brother Yang. Standing off to the side, the fully bearded man from Spirit Beast Mountain involuntarily cried out with wide eyes, having seen the whole thing clearly. He personally saw that Han Li was able to kill his close friend with a simple wave of his hand from about 3 meters away. His friend's head rolled on the ground with a gu-lu-lu sound, separated from its body. However, the now headless body continued to back up a few steps until it fell over on the ground, blood spurting from its neck about a few feet high with hoo-hoo sounds. The fully bearded man suddenly felt his hands and feet turn ice cold with a cold sweat down his back. The methods the opponent used to kill his friend were too demonic. He had seen clearly that his friend was killed without contact, and the opponent for sure hadn't used any kind of magic technique. Boy, as soon as I get out I will hack you to pieces. Although he felt beads of cold sweat exuding from his forehead and was filled with grief for his friend, the fully bearded man maintained a menacing attitude to strengthen his courage, bracing himself and standing firm. In actuality, however, he had decided in his heart that as soon as he escaped from the earth prison technique, he would immediately run far away, biding his time. Revenge was a dish best served cold, after all. The boy in front of him was too strange. Not only did he have the high-grade earth prison technique talisman, but he also could kill people with invisible weapons, making him truly difficult to deal with. Getting revenge for his friend is indeed important, but first he must preserve his own life. It turned out that the seemingly ferocious fully bearded man was actually a person as cowardly as a mouse that bullied the weak yet feared the strong. Most people would be surprised by this. Of course, Han Li had no way of knowing his opponent's thoughts. All he saw was that the opponent had released another pangolin-like beast that, along with that strange snake, had begun to fiercely attack the yellow barrier. The fully bearded man had also taken out a pair of iron rod-like magic tools to aid the two beasts in smashing the barrier, causing it to flicker with light incessantly. The earth prison technique could not be maintained for much longer. As soon as Han Li realized this, he took out his golden light brick treasure talisman with one hand, bringing it in front of his eyes and staring at it intently in order to activate it. If he were to use any other normal magic tool, he simply could not feel at ease. His opponent, after all, was a 13th layer expert. If he was unable to kill him with one blow, there would be big trouble when his opponent escaped. Until now, he still remembered the exhausting battle with Senior Marshal Brother Lu, and at that time Senior Marshal Brother Lu had only been at the 12th layer. Despite this, he had not expected that he could actually use the transparent thread to finish off a 12th layer opponent. However, the fully bearded man was already on guard and would not be defeated so easily. The fully bearded man under the earth prison technique, seeing the weird movements of the talisman in Han Li's hands, felt his heart tense. He tightened his grip on the pair of black iron cudgels. But the yellow barrier of the earth prison technique was extremely strong. Even if it had changed shape and darkened to the point of being in danger of fracturing, it continued to maintain its integrity. Upon seeing this, the fully bearded man became so angry that he almost vomited blood. At this time, he suddenly felt a gust of an astonishing amount of spirit power rocketing up from Han Li's direction. He couldn't help but slowly turn his body and look in his direction. He saw Han Li's hand emitting a strong golden light, and a lustrous, shining golden rectangular object slowly rose up, floating in midair. Treasure talisman. The fully bearded man's expression changed dramatically, and he began to yell in terror. He had realized the nature of the golden light brick. What he didn't know, however, was that Han Li's face at this moment was also deathly pale with alarm. The floating object was furiously draining all of his inner magic power steadily, without any way of stopping it. It seemed as if it would suck him dry. The quietly complaining Han Li, as he was suffering, began to curse the store that had sold him this item. How is this a treasure talisman? It's clearly a leech that wants to kill me. However, when a third of his magic power had been drained, the treasure talisman finally stopped its wild movements and calmed down. Control over it once again returned to Han Li. At this time, Han Li did not hesitate and pointed, causing the golden light brick treasure talisman to immediately shoot out. It flew straight towards the fully bearded man, who was still trapped under the earth prison technique. His face became ashen from fright. The golden brick began to expand, and in the blink of an eye, it became as large as a room. Spiritual chi revolved around it and radiated golden light in all directions. Its pressure was truly astonishing. When it reached the fully bearded man's forehead, the golden brick was like a small mountain in size, and it came down with a violent clap. Pang! Ah! After the loud sound and fully bearded man's blood-curdling scream, the entire earth shook violently. Han Li was both surprised and happy. His expression was somewhat strange. Was it really possible to eliminate a 13th layer disciple that easily? Han Li had some doubts. As soon as he retrieved the treasure talisman, the golden light brick immediately returned to its original form and flew back into Han Li's hand. An extremely large crater had formed in the place where the golden brick had slammed into the ground, almost 30 meters wide and a meter deep. As for the fully bearded man and his spirit beasts, they had become a pile of mud, indistinguishable from one another. The fully bearded man really had been killed. Han Li was at a loss. It was as if he couldn't resist a single strike in the slightest. Was it that the fully bearded man was too weak, or that the golden light brick was simply too strong? Han Li was unable to decide. However, after generating such a loud noise, it was no longer safe to stay in this place. Han Li quickly became sober. After he destroyed the two corpses, he took the 5 or 6 storage pouches and left the area, leaving the skyline. Continuing to walk forward would most likely have led to a large forest, which was incidentally also an ideal place to ambush and kill people. Perhaps after entering the forest there would be another fierce battle waiting for him. Thus, before entering, he decided to find a place to rest a little and restore his magic power in order to protect himself. Chapter 185 The Strong. Chapter 185 The Strong. While Han Li was on the outer edges of the forest, he found a dense, large tree. When he jumped on top of the tree to recover his strength, the entire forbidden area had reached the first climax of the Trial of Blood and Fire's massacre. Various strong individuals revealed their fangs one by one and began to purge the nearby weaklings. The closer they were to the center of the area, the more frequent and bloody the massacres became. Of course, experts of equivalent strength would occasionally run into each other. They would look past the other person and reach a wordless, mutual understanding, simply brushing past one another. It was not time for them to do battle yet. With this said, of the many disciples from various sects in the forbidden area, the majority could be divided into three types of people. One kind were those who were extremely weak, people whose cultivation were only around the 11th or even 10th layer. They all had very different reasons for entering this forbidden area. If it wasn't because of hardships against their will, it was because they were forced, or it was because they were hopeful in their luck to take advantage of a crisis for their own gain. Regardless of their reasons, they were all part of the bloody massacre's lowest level, only able to play the role of being slaughtered. Often after the first day in this forbidden area, apart from a few people with the most clever and particular self-preservation methods, these weaklings were almost completely purged by others. Of course, people like Han Li could rely on strange treasures and fierce incisiveness, but he could be considered an exception. The second kind were those like the fully bearded man. Although their magic power was not weak, their self-regard and strength could not compare with the experts, and they were aware that to obtain a spiritual item was beyond hope. They were unwilling to battle with the highest layer experts inside the forbidden area for the spiritual herbs, instead turning their attention to the first type of people. They intended to use this opportunity to kill these people and steal their treasures, quietly becoming very rich. These kinds of people inside of the Trial of Blood and Fire, for the first 2 days, were quite active. When the third day began, however, the remaining victors would automatically lie low in the forbidden area, refusing to reveal themselves anymore. This was because they were very clear that after the third day it was time for the experts to have showdowns with one another. If these middle-strength people ran into such an expert during this time, it would absolutely be a one-way trip to death. Of course, there were also a few who were either arrogant or did not have a grasp of their own strength and would charge directly into center of the battle for the spiritual medicines. Their bodies would never be found. However, most of the people grabbed opportunities early and withdrew quickly, and were often the most common type of person in the Trial of Blood and Fire. In contrast, the strongest individuals would die tragically one by one, as if part of some kind of joke. Thus, the last type of people became the least common. These people were at the top of the pyramid, and they were the most elite disciples of the various sects that had entered the forbidden area. They were the ones that the various sects had placed their high hopes on. As for the other disciples of the same schools, they were at the most cannon fodder, meant to aid the plans of their various sects. This group was elite, their magic power was profound, complemented by magic tools with astonishing power. They only had one goal, which was to kill all the disciples of other sects and steal away enough spiritual medicine. The extent of the first massacre at the start lay in their mutual, wordless understanding to first get rid of the trash and all those who were only there to take advantage of the situation. This was to prevent these people from obstructing their movements and, in general, any problems from sprouting up. In addition, the news that someone had been one step in front of them to the central area did not make them panic or become edgy. Entering it was easy, but if they wanted to bring spiritual medicine out, that would be incredibly difficult. The massacre continued to progress, but because Han Li was still a distance away from the central area, he was still not able to involve his recovered self. However, other weaker members were not as lucky as Han Li, and many were brought into the middle of the massacre even as they desperately struggled to free themselves to protect their own lives. And Saber Transformation Doc Su'er was one of these people. Today, Su'er's face was deathly pale, staring at the person in front of him with an expression of pure terror. This person was big and was carrying a giant silver sword. It was this person who had, right in front of Su'er, already killed the other 2 disciples from Saber Transformation Doc. Under his giant silver sword, it didn't matter what kind of high-grade weapon and protective armors were used. It was as if they couldn't even withstand one attack, being ripped apart one by one as if they were thin paper. They were inevitably sliced in 2. However, it was because there were those 2 other disciples from the same sect that Su'er, seeing that the situation was far from good, seized the opportunity to slip away, falling into confusion as he ran. Unfortunately, the big man didn't seem to have the idea of letting him go. instead persistently chasing him for a few dozens of hours and finally catching up to him here. This caused him to thoroughly lose hope. "If you kill yourself, I can leave you an intact corpse," said the big guy expressionlessly and with a cold glare. You can go die." In the midst of his hopeless situation, Su-er, who knew that he would not live much longer, erupted in fighting spirit. He took the only 2 high-grade magic tools he had on him and, in one breath, threw them all out. "Idiot!" The big guy spoke this very deliberately. Next, the huge silver sword flew from his back into the air. As if without effort, the 2 magic tools were broken into pieces. In the same motion, Su-er was also cut into 2 pieces. After finishing all of this, the big guy did not even bother to look at Su-er's corpse. Instead, he spun on his heel and left without even the idea of moving towards the storage pouch. To him, the only magic tool he needed was the huge silver sword. Any other magic tool or precious item would only distract him and would be a big hindrance to his cultivation. At the same time, at a small brook near the central area, a female disciple of the masked moon sect controlled a magic tool like a scarf while drenched in sweat. She was currently bitterly defending herself from 2 red, shiny daggers, but it seemed as if at any moment she would be unable to defend herself any longer. Could this senior martial brother wielding daggers please let this junior martial sister go? "I am willing to serve senior martial brother with my body tonight." Since this woman was at death's door and was past caring about shame, she used a woman's greatest advantage and tried to seduce him. But would it succeed? Based on their encounters and the tactics he had used, she had absolutely no idea. "Fine, withdraw your magic tools and I'll agree." The person speaking was an 18 or 19-year-old male wearing a earthy-colored robe. He had delicate features, red cheeks, and white teeth, all the characteristics of a delicate, handsome male. Having said this, he stopped his 2 daggers in midair and lightly smiled at the woman. The masked moon sect female was delighted and hurriedly gave him 2 winks. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly allowed the scarf to descend, retrieving it into her hand. Then, she stuck her breasts out, as if she was about to say something. Unfortunately, before she could open her lips, the handsome male's face suddenly expressed a killing intent. His finger violently pointed, and in a surprising turn of events, 2 red flying daggers immediately cut in a crisscross. The woman, without a whisper, fell to the ground, fresh blood puddling on the floor. SL*T. Even someone as common and unrefined as you thinks that they can seduce me, Han Qianya. Used here is different from Han Li's surname. The handsome male's face bore an expression of disgust, his voice suddenly becoming intense. Next, he took out a pleasant-smelling handkerchief from his waist, delicately wiping the dust on his face. His movements were very gentle and reserved, as if he were an unmarried daughter of a noble household. "I should hasten my journey. Perhaps there will be others along the road who will also provide some entertainment." After thinking this aloud, the male carelessly tossed the handkerchief he had used to wipe himself onto the female's face, leaving with a swagger. Deep in the forest, a disciple of the spirit beast mountain lay dead on the ground. A yellow-robed, middle-aged man stood nearby. He was currently shaking his head and staring at the sky, mumbling something to himself. Behind him were a few extremely fierce beasts lying on the ground, not moving, without a breath. On top of the barren mountain, an ugly-faced, green-robed man was frantically controlling about a large swarm of huge bees, besieging a few people dressed like Taoists. Just like that, the strong massacring the weak could be found everywhere in the forbidden area. Although Han Li did not see all of this, he could faintly smell a bloody scent drifting through the air. However, he had no time to look into the whole story, instead sitting on the treetop without moving, gradually restoring the magic power in his body. The time passed by very quickly, and more than half of the first night in the forbidden area had already gone by. What shocked Han Li was that in this area, the amount of extremely bright light was the same during both daytime and nighttime. The entire sky was always an overcast color, making people who saw it feel somewhat unsettled. When his magic power had been restored enough and as Han Li was rejoicing quietly in his heart, the sound of hurried footsteps and heavy gasps suddenly came from far away, slowly getting closer. It was as if there was someone running towards the very tree that Han Li was meditating on.